see the icon that stays on. So
yeah.
I don't know. And you can see we're live now on YouTube.
Yeah, we're live.
Yep, because
cool.
there, so you could say hi real quick.
Okay, hello.
And I just usually let like 10, 15 minutes pass so more people can join.
Yeah.
But it's a good time to maybe I'll do my shout outs. So Shawn is, this kind of works for Shawn too, because his work is currently up on the Queen's Key. The Colin Kaepernick Know Your Rights camp was the first thing that we had actually had a chance to execute together. So it's kind of like full circle, because that's at Harborfront right now, in the outdoors. It's so relevant, right? That work is so relevant right now.
Very much so.
So I got to give that shout out to Harborfront, who's always creating space and supporting the visions. And I think that it's full circle for us to be coming back together right now. So much love to Harborfront for allowing that to happen. TD for their financial funding support, as always, putting their mouth where their money is. And then, of course, my co-curator, Trey Anthony, who I know we're kind of coming to the end of the series in a way, because then we also have an exhibit going up with Shawn that's going to last for a while, and also the Paris, Texas, LA gallery, which you're the director of. So we know that that's coming up too. But as far as like the co-curating programming that Trey and I have been doing, that's going to come to an end in the next few weeks. So I want to shout out to her and let everybody know she's got a live performance happening, which she's also in, called Love and Resistance in Our Art. So check that out this Saturday. And I want to introduce Shawn. So Shawn is an award-winning photographer and also a director, a newly appointed director at Paris, Texas Gallery. Thank you for joining us. Why don't you just give a little intro, because bios are boring. So why don't you just catch us up on like where you're at?
Yeah, bios are boring, right?
Bios are boring.
They're like resumes for all intents and purposes. Yeah, so I'm a Philadelphia-based artist. I'm a bit bi-coastal. I spend a great deal of time in LA. Most of my work is centered in and around Black communities. As I like to distinguish them, Black communities are one thing, but vanishing Black neighborhoods is another. I focus much of my work and my photographic study in and around vanishing Black communities. And I've been shooting now since 2007, 2008 is when I started to get back into photography as a practice. Prior to that, I was a painter and a collage artist, and I'm still a collage artist. I still make collage. But much of my work in the photographic space is more or less my interpretations of what I'd like to do in painting first. So that's where my compositional strengths come from. And I just enjoy making work in and about Black community. There is this through line that I find it's a harmony based on the sense of color first. I've made reference to that in many of my pieces, that when you're in a Black neighborhood because the color becomes vibrant, and things stop being very stagnant and still, and that sort of new age gray and brown isn't really present. It's more of a reflection of the celebration of culture through color. And I look for that in any city that I go to. So much of my work has been about trying to find those sort of common points between one city and the next. And it's probably going to be my life's work. I would love to be able to visit every single city, in town. But, I don't know if and or when I'll be able to say that it's a finished project. So along the way, I've made different bodies of work that sort of denote the changes in where I see the community or where I see the community. And it's turned itself into the metaphysical, the spiritual, and most importantly for me, the afromythological. Right. So that's sort of where my thing is. I like to point my work into this space that doesn't necessarily exist, you know, in an academic sense. There is folklore, there's African folklore and spiritual folklore, and much of it's borrowed from traditions, African traditions, and the griot traditions. But, you know, I'd like to think that I'm discovering a space and a place where other photographers and artists can start working in. So it's something that I've started building
Pioneering.
fairly recently.
Yeah, pioneering a bit. And you know,
Yeah.
I'm going to touch on that Afro mythology point next, because that was one of the first things that I actually, when I saw that, and I was like, what is that? And it was such a good response, but as it is a response to Afrofuturism, which we all know kind of well, that term. But
Yeah.
before I go too forward to go
Yes.
backwards to mythology, fun enough, but I want to hear, because you're also from Philly.
Yeah.
You currently reside where?
Yeah. Philadelphia. Yeah.
Philadelphia.
I wasn't born in Philly though. I gotta make
You were
that.
born in Germany, right?
I was born in Germany.
Yeah.
I'm the product of an army guy, so I'm an army brat. Lived around the world a little bit, but my dad's from West Philly, and my
Yeah.
mom's from a suburb outside of Philly called Devon. If I didn't say that, believe me, everyone in Philly right now would be like ready to
Speak
like,
the truth.
yeah.
Speak
Philly
the
people are
truth
serious
about
about our lineage, you know.
Right, and as we are too here in Canada,
Right.
because a lot of us come from first and second generation parents. Most of us is second generation, right? So we're
Right.
very strong on our lineage. And I guess that's what I was trying to allude to is, you know, growing up in Philly, being born in Germany, and just like I know that, you know, both your parents, neither of your parents are artists, right? You have one family member that's an artist. It was your aunt?
Well, my mom was a photographer for quite some
Oh,
time.
she was.
Yeah, my first camera came from my mom, and I still use it. It's a Pentax K1000,
Yeah.
and it might be as old as I am. But that was her camera, and she was a budding nature photographer, and still shoots. She has a wonderful garden that you know, her Instagram is popping.
Oh, so you come by it naturally. You have to give all respects due to your mom.
Got to give it to my mom.
Okay.
And then my painting skill came from my aunt. My aunt was a painter, and she still paints too. But you know, I was sort of introduced to the arts from my mother and my aunt. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Got that one. I had that one a little wrong. But so you do have an artistic background. But back to what I was gonna say about Philly. I feel like I mean Philadelphia, like a lot of like it's a pretty urbanized community. Like there's some urbanized communities there. And how much do you feel like that helps set the tone for trying to understand your thoughts on like underrepresentation of Black Americans? Because you actually started in the graffiti scene. Let's go
Yeah.
all the way back.
Yeah,
How much of that and how much of your work was informed from the very get-go from growing up, even as just a Black male in Philadelphia?
Oh, well, you know, I absolutely love that you bring that up, because not a lot of people know that I was a graffiti artist.
I do my research, Shawn.
Yeah, you did. You really did. Yeah, I still get out every now and again with my people. But yeah, graffiti was one of the first introductions into like an oral tradition, and understanding that there was lineage involved, and there was language, and there's this sort of a vernacular that was in place. And a lot of people don't know this about, you know, and people love to argue this point. Graffiti started as we know it. Graffiti started here in Philadelphia, and then it migrated its way into New York. So we are in the home and the birthplace of some of the most amazing early talents in graffiti, and all of that sort of, you know, visual linguistic skill that comes in of creating new alphabets. It's something that gets handed down. You get yourself somebody who is a skilled older graffiti artist. They might give you, you know, a bunch of handbooks, you know, with sketches in it and alphabets, and you know, you're practicing. And what you're doing is learning these traditions that came from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and up to today.
Yeah.
And that really kind of set the tone for me, particularly in Philly, because we have what's known as the Mural Arts program, which initially started out as Philadelphia Anti-Graffiti Network. they used to be the enemy. And, you know, they recruited a lot of people early on, out of the street, you know, and out of just, you know, being graffiti artists into their spaces. Now, this is a controversial statement. You
We
know,
love controversy.
controversy is good. I mean, there's people who say that mural arts decimated the graffiti art scene here, or
Right.
that street art, as it came along with gentrification, decimated
Yeah.
graffiti. And I think there's lanes for everything. And I think there's, you know, there's still a need for a sense of disambiguation of what is graffiti, traditional Philadelphian graffiti, what is street art, and what is the mural scene. And I think, given that we have a lot of wall space here, there's room for everything. And
Right.
I'm happily involved in all those scenes. Um, I have two murals going up right now in conjunction with Mural Arts that celebrate two very important neighborhoods. One is Strawberry Mansion, which is a part of North Philadelphia. And then there's another neighborhood, 8th and Diamond, has a really strong history in North Philadelphia on the opposite side of Strawberry Mansion. And I'm just proud to be a part of, you know, while these neighborhoods are shrinking and disappearing, there are emblematic works going up celebrating Blackness. You know,
Yep.
because that's really what it's about. It's making sure that we're not forgotten in the
Yep.
spaces that we have occupied for generations.
And talking about the spaces we've been occupying for generations and like going really deep into roots and ritual, I want to get back to the term afromythology, right?
Mhm.
And I thought this was such an interesting conversation between us because this past, as you were a part of Kumba with the Know Your Rights camp photography, I showed a lot of Afrofuturism work. It's almost like I had to, it's not that I got checked, but when you said what you said in terms of it being a response to that, I was just like, wow, I've never, because the term Afro mythology is not something that I've heard or I've used in my vocabulary or I've seen written anywhere until I came across your work.
Right.
So I'd really be interested in hearing kind of how you approached that and where the term came from and what was important about the separation between mythology and futurism.
Yeah, I stumbled on the fact that there was this gap. I was, you know, kind of you know, being in the space, being in this sort of creative space and Instagram and instant access to everyone else's ideas. Afrofuturism, out of much of the philosophical thought that came out of the late 90s and 2000s, centered around the idea of there are Black people in the future. And I thought that was a really great place to have discussion because, in as much as you have that, you know, we are very aware that there are Black people in the past. But that conversation has been mostly about enslavement, and that's not centering the most important thing about African Americans as a culture is our invention of Blackness. We are the inventors of Blackness as a culture, and as it moves forward through other cultures, you see its presence pretty much everywhere and anywhere. Like you can tell when, you know, Blackness has reached a place where it never existed before. And I was thinking about Black creators and how a lot of the discussion was moving forward rather than acknowledging this centering of Blackness backward. And I was like, there's a disconnect with the foundation, you know, because it seemed like the foundation was happening in the present and we we're projecting forward versus saying, you know, there's some ideals backward that make sense. So I started, you know, looking for African American mythology, like just straight up Google searching and digging in the books. And I couldn't find anything. I kept finding African American folklore, African folklore, spiritual folklore, everything that in and around those spaces having to do with the oral tradition. And then I just was like, well, you know, if we have Afrofuturism and that is truly a mythological place, why isn't there a root, an intellectual root of just straight up Afro mythology?
Yeah.
I started digging a little deeper, and there was nothing there. And I was really kind of, it was surprising because to be the first, if you will, to say a word having to do with your people, it was a proud moment. But then I realized that I was very much alone in the creative space. There are other artists who create in and around the ideas of a reimagined post-slavery African American existence, but nothing that is distinguished and separated away from whiteness and the
Right.
impact of whiteness and enslavement. It was a lot of reimagining what slavery could have been like that I kept finding, like, and I just didn't think that made sense. Like, it just didn't have enough teeth, if you will. So, and this then looking at where it was going, it felt like this sort of how would I mean? It was like an incongruent reality, that was being made for Afrofuturism. So I started thinking about what would it look like to just make, you know, photography based around allegorical scenes of, Black deities, Black spiritual beings.
Right.
How would that be? And then I wanted to be 100% sure that I wasn't making, the Black Zeus or the Black Hercules I didn't want to do any of that.
Right.
So I wanted to make sure that all of this work that I wanted to make was founded on, first, just regular people being magical. So my first body of work, Church of Broken Pieces, it was about the sort of magical moments that regular, quotidian Black people just doing regular things suddenly find themselves in spiritual moments, out and about while they're just living their lives. This mundane moment becomes magical. And it's the magic that's within. And then in Future Antebellum, I wanted to take it a step further, and I wanted to kind of expose, or, as Black people, we talk about having this ancestral connection, and our ancestors are around us. And it's funny, we hear that conversation a lot in afromythology, like, oh, the ancestors are around us.
Right. Just in spiritual practices, right? Just rituals as well.
Right.
I'm gonna throw a piece up while you talk about this, actually, because I think it's important for people to see the narrative, like to hear the narrative for these pieces.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? So I have adoration, or not so satisfactional, or the winds of Africanus. Which one really touch points right now?
Let's go not so satisfactional.
Okay. So I'm gonna have them, good old Harborfront, throw this up. I don't know. I can't actually see if it's up. So I'll let you keep talking.
Right.
But just in terms of, like you were saying, like the ritual part of it.
Oh, there it is.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, this was from out of the body of work known as Future Antebellum. I wanted to have this sense of presence of spirits who protect, but I also wanted to challenge the ideas around colorism. I wanted to challenge people's, sort of visual narratives of who's in charge and why, and who's the ancestors and why. So in any of the works that you see, these hyperpigmented, deeply melanated folks, that's the spiritual essence of what I'm talking about. That's the deity, that's the ancestor. And I sort of started to write it as if these are only, you can't see them with the naked eye. You can only see them if if you're taking a photograph. And their presence is not meant to be in real time. So I wanted to start making these types of pieces of who's protecting whom. Are the sisters in front, and they are sisters, protecting the sisters in the back, and they are sisters. So it's like, I wanted to be sure that these conversations started happening without much prompting, but I wanted to kind of borrow from our current state of affairs of, dealing with colorism within our community, and how does that translate into, our understanding of spirituality. Like, if you're color struck, would you be, afraid of or maligned in some way by a hyper melanated being protecting you in some way. And then in this piece, there's 6 people. There's also 2 gentlemen in the back. So I'm also making a statement about Black femininity being much more further ahead in importance than male ego. And that's part of what's happening in this piece. The men are literally there as a construct to support femininity. And it's one of those subtle conversations that I like to have within this body of work, Future Antebellum. It's supposed to be set in a space where, you know, this sort of the ideas and systems that hashtag create and the incongruent realities that they make come into life, but also collide with spirituality and collide with how we, you know, describe ourselves as Black people who are in touch with our sense of ancestry and space. So that's. Mm-hmm.
There's another really, I can't pronounce it, Shawn, please forgive me. Say, pay, pitchen, and please pronounce that properly. I tried my best, but I found this image to be very, very controversial.
Pop it up on screen.
Say, pay, pitchen, and
it's worth talking about.
This one, yeah. Because you also just mentioned, like, not so much of it was about slavery or the re-envisioning of slavery, or not even so much the white gaze. So it's very ancestral for you. So could you please walk us through this one?
So I usually leave the titles up for people to go and do research on the titles. I'll tell you that right now. I like when people actually go and find things, because there's Easter eggs in all of my pieces that connect you from one body of work to the next. So the title is kind of a clue, but also the Easter egg in this is this gold rope. And a lot of people have misinterpreted it because of the times. You know, we see it and we tend to think of it sympathetically in terms of lynching and in terms of, you know, Black male death and, you know, Black women being at the forefront of the Black liberation movement right now. However, it's quite different in its creation. It was meant to show a connection between 2 bodies of work. This is from the Sisters of Cyprus. This is one of my more recent bodies of work, and it connects back to a separate work called Fruit of Comets. And they're repeating. So the thing that you have to know is that I love utilizing and using the same people over and over again.
Yep.
So you'll see their evolution as, you know, living, breathing Black folks, and then they're pictured again as deities, because I'm showing you different points in time in and along this space of afromythology and where they exist in these different spaces. So this is a part of the crown of one of the weary guardians. And we'll probably get to that. That's in the Winds of Africanus. You just remember this rope because it's important. But what I tend to do is link each one of my stories together visually and allow my viewer to bring the language to it. When I started making these works, I knew that visually there are things that trigger people, and this looks awfully triggering, you know. And I wanted something that was both sensitive and intimate in touch, but also had a bit of foreboding danger. But it wasn't meant to just be one thing at all.
Right.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I'm gonna, like, just before I go on, because I have such a long series of questions for you as always. I'm just gonna, because I like showing the link, the Winds of Africanus. You said you mentioned. So I think that's another piece that we're showing as part of your exhibition at Harborfront. So I'd love to get that up on screen and have you create that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Point for us.
For sure.
There we go. See, now at first glance, I'm gonna admit I don't see the instant connection.
So look in there in the headpieces. There's the rope.
Yep. Ah.
Yeah, and that happens in every piece that I've done. There's something from somewhere else being passed along from one scene into the next, and it's up to you as the viewer to kind of make those connections of how these individuals that all have, and they all have names, and they all have like their own personal stories that have kind of traveled along where they are and why they are. So this, so I'm going to tell you about why these characters look the way they do. They are actually modeled after the subject of a painting out of the Orientalism movement. If anyone wants to do a Google search on this dress and headdress, you'll find the painting that this is based on. And what I do is I try to find paintings and photographs that have Black subjects in them, and pull them out of that piece, and give them the sense of liberation that may not have existed in their actual lives. Many of the people who pose for photos or pose for paintings did not have control over their agency, and it might have been a job. It might have been a sense of assertive control being placed on an individual. There's a lot of missing stories. This is where that, the missing archive of Blackness and Black agency, when it comes down to the creation of art, it's usually about the white creator and not about the subject or the subject matter, or how did this person even come to be sitting for such a thing. So I like to pull out a lot of these subjects and give them the life that they deserve. So these characters are based on a young man who sat for a painting, and it was just sort of a faked out piece. He wasn't from this from this far off land, but it's like I wanted to free him from that, and I do that as well. Looking at if you look at there's a whole ceramics discussion about ornamental Blackness and the freezing of Black bodies in servitude. That it's made. These are pieces that are made still to this day. The Venetian ceramics, the Blackamoors. If you want to look that up, the Blackamoor ceramics. These are Black bodies frozen in servitude, but they are made in the image of people who were dignitaries in the 14th and 15th century, who came to Europe to do business. But in return, their image and likeness has been used to hold tables and lanterns and candy jars and things like that. Wow. So that liberation of the Black body for me, that's where a lot of my energy is spent, in thinking about how spiritually damning that can be. We've grown up with them, and we literally have never thought about their significance. Currently, if you think of the most recent one would be the discussion in and around Aunt Jemima. That's a more or less modern interpretation of servitude, and that depiction of Blackness as servitude. But it isn't anything that's that new. It goes back hundreds of years. So it's something I would like to work on. That's my space that I like to be in.
Thank you. I would not have, it's funny because these aren't things that you just pick up with with one glance, or even if you sit there staring at it for hours. There's like this thread to all your stories that keep joining, and the storytelling keeps continuing. And it's rare, I think, to see that in photography series. And also ones, because Future Antebellum is a continuation of, what was that one called? The Church of
Broken Pieces.
Right, that was a continuation from there, right?
Yeah.
So I have of course, leave it to my computer. They're always like,
it was gonna be one of us. I'm glad it was you and not me.
Turn off your phone, on your computer, Ashley. It's the first time. Getting into your, I mean, your images are so striking, Shawn. And I think like it just captures everybody like immediately. And this kind of brings me to like, for other photographers out there who might be looking at you as a mentor, or might now be looking at your body of work as something that they reference. Who were some of your, I know we're gonna get into Jamal Shabazz, I know that's,
you know it.
that's the guy.
Look, I'm always gonna shout the teacher out.
Right.
So,
Got you, and Jamal is amazing.
yeah, I mean, honest to goodness, he is one of my, like before I even met him, he was this sort of iconic figure that was just, looming larger than life. Like he captured everything that I grew up with. Growing up in the 80s, just seeing hip hop culture and living it, to then seeing his books and seeing, a true reflection of who I saw myself as, like, fly dudes wearing this, that. It's like you didn't see this, So I believe it was 2008 or 2000. I can't remember. It was a minute back. It was a long time ago. But I met him. He was in a group show at Mokata in Brooklyn. And at the time I was living in Brooklyn. And my girlfriend at the time was like, yo, there's this great, show going on. And it's like so many people, so many artists. And, and I look at the, it was like Russell, shout out to Russell Frederick, another one of those names who was there. And it was just people who I had only seen represented in books. And one of the books that I had early on was Dr. Deborah Willis's Black book. And I had made a list of everyone in there. I just wrote it all down, and I was like, I want to meet each and every one of these people, and suddenly here's the opportunity to meet Jamel. And this was like right around the time that it was like the weekend before my birthday, or a couple days before my birthday. And I was like, yo, I gotta get to this thing. So I go, and he's there, and I love telling this story because he's like, is surrounded by all these Black creatives, and everyone's just like, he's a really tall dude, and he's eloquent, he's kind, so he's just magnetic, right? And I'm just like, all right, it's now or never, you know what I mean? I was like, if I don't do this now, I'm never gonna meet this dude again. And I just pushed my way through the crowd, like literally, like elbowed my way, like in this circle of brothers and sisters. I just like pushed people out the way. And I just was like, Brother Shabazz, how are you? Tell him my name. And I was just like, listen, I'm gonna do what you do. And he just like, looked at me. He was like, what are you doing tomorrow? And I was like, oh, nothing. I had some plans, but if Brother Shabazz is gonna ask you what's your plans, everything goes by the wayside. So, so we ended up meeting the next day out in Prospect Park, and he wanted to just kind of introduce me to how it is that he does what he does. And it was like, we didn't talk about cameras, we didn't talk about lenses, we didn't do any of that kind of stuff. But what he showed me was how he interacted with our people. And it was eye-opening because, there's a sense of when you first get into photography, and I hear this a lot from younger photographers, there's this trepidation of approaching people you don't know. Like, you want to keep your distance, you don't know if you can get close. There's all kinds of things that happen that keep you kind of locked in a way and more of a spectator, So I watched him, and I watched how he engaged every single person with this, really engaging language of love. And that was the lesson, the lesson right off the bat was, this is how you make these approaches. So I took that, ran with it. And of course, you know, over the years, we stay in touch. And getting to this particular event at Snap Space, it was important because he told me this, and I couldn't believe it. He said he had never done a show with anybody, and he was just like, I'd love to do it. And this is Patrick and Holly Kahn, their gallery in Orlando, Florida, and they both, represented our interests, and they thought it was a great idea. And we just said, I mean, who says no to doing a show
Right.
with
Yeah.
Jamel Shabazz?
Right.
So, in their beautiful gallery space, his work's on one side, mine is on the other. And then there's this language that's happening between my mythological world and his magical, real Black world. And it just, at first, I'm not gonna lie. I remember when they first approached me, I was like, it doesn't make sense to me. Because I wanted to, I've been a street photographer for so long. I wanted to have, my street work there. And then when I saw it all together, I realized that this was the language. Like,
Right.
this was the balance.
Right.
But Brother Shabazz is, if anyone can find any kind of mentor, you'd be lucky to have one like him. And I've mentored other photographers in the same way that he has mentored me, and I've provided opportunities in the same way that I believe his presence in my life has given me as well. And I'm thankful for him. And I tell him this all the time. And every time there's an opportunity that I can
Pick him up.
just light it up and be like, yo, Jamel Shabazz. I believe in that. Like, why wait until later? Like, I'm just trying to light on them now,
There's something to be said too about having that mentorship and being able to find, like you said, to identify somebody that you see yourself or you see your work wanting to be like or see yourself in. And that I want to take the chance now to identify that you recently have acquired a new role in Paris, Texas, LA gallery in LA. Congratulations, and that's amazing. We don't see, and I mean, from the Canadian landscape, we definitely do not see. We could probably count them. Not probably. We could count the levels of directors, the director level, the Black people that are director levels in the institutions and in the gallery system on one hand. And where I do sometimes think that we have maybe this romanticized way of how we look at the United States and how they celebrate Black artists and the placement of like exec roles and director roles and even curator roles in the United States. I almost feel like we might be romanticizing it a little bit too much. So I'd love to hear just a little bit more about your position there, how you got into it, what it means for you to be a Black male gallery director at this time, and if really there is that many even in LA. If this is actually a rare occurrence.
It's funny. I was having this conversation earlier. I was like, I wonder how many other Black male, directors there are, gallery directors there are in LA. I do know that there is a presence of Black male curators, registrars, and there's a presence in the institutional space, but in the commercial space, I don't know. I don't think there's a strong presence. I do know of gallery owners, Black gallery owners in LA, and that's awesome because, to be very honest, LA, given its geography and its history, it seems as though that there's much more opportunity to say there's a higher concentration if we were to do that research and say, here they are. But when we look at what's happening nationally and how these positions have not really had a history of having Black people in general,
right,
those seats, and how those seats are only recently becoming filled, and it seems to be accelerated by current events. There's this about face that's happening in and around the art world where these appointments are happening rather rapidly. I question you know, a lot of the reason comes down to education. This is, the curatorial arts, art in general. These are not spaces that, you know, we find Black people, in the Black community being pushed into as an opportunity,
Yeah.
or in the same respect, we're not seeing the opportunities, in these institutions, in the colleges and universities. They're not open to us in those spaces. So the idea that I am here right now comes from me seizing an opportunity. Being at that gallery, um, I signed with Paris, Texas, LA about a year, maybe a year and a half ago. Brandon was a fan of my work. He had seen Brandon, Brandon Mason, yeah. So he was a fan of my work. In 2015, I had a show in Santa Barbara at a place called Breakfast, which was a place that was run by my buddy Morgan Masson. And it was my first show outside of Philadelphia. And, Brandon purchased about 5 pieces, of my work, and just kind of stayed in touch with where my career was going. And when he founded his gallery, he kept kind of, kept a loose sort of touch in and around what my career was doing. And when it was finally time for us to meet, we had such a great conversation and an immediate rapport. I felt very comfortable, being with an upstart, a young gallery. Like, I was like, yeah, I like that you're taking this risk. I'll take the risk with you. And when when the previous director moved on to a new opportunity, and there was no one that I believe he found interesting enough to fill that seat, I stepped up and just said, hey, why not let's create something new, something that you're already diverse. Like there was no conversation about diversity and appointment because of diversity. We were equally passionate about the arts, and I just was like, I think it's a good move because I know a lot of people who need this break, and this is getting back to that sense of mentorship. Yep. And creating opportunity. And I thought about how long it had been for me being in my career, how long it took me to get to LA, to get to a point where I had opportunities. So I wanted to shorten that distance for other people. And in this position, that's basically that was like my first sort of thing. I was like, I want to make sure that people get the shot sooner,
There's something, you said something to me about the group show, because we're doing your show, Future Antebellum. That's going to be a show.
And thank you for that. Thank you.
The work is stunning. We're really lucky to have it at this time. But like, this is kind of like a 2-part question, because one, I find it really interesting that you're now in a director position at a gallery, and you also have suffered like racial prejudice against your work. And I remember you and I kind of connecting when this whole BLM movement started, and you were just like, anything to help somebody who is another Black voice, because now you're seeing that all of the galleries who had just kind of shut the door or just were just pausing and taking so long to get back to, we're coming running. And that's the whole thing with Black artists right now during this BLM movement, is that it's wasted time that people are trying to make up for, or it's just trying to fill a false mandate for a very short period of time. We're trying to do some type of performance allyship in a very short period of time. So I think it's interesting that you've landed this role during this time and what that means for you. But also you said something really interesting, and I do want to touch on that, what I just said. I have a bad habit of being like, there's 2 in 1. But first, you said something interesting, because we're bringing the group show. We're doing a group show with Paris, Texas, LA Gallery, also with Harborfront. And you said the reason that the artists that were chosen for this show was because at some point of your career, they had lifted you up as well.
That's right. Yeah. Each one of the initial people that I brought in for representation is there's something they did for me along the way that pushed me to the point where I am. And this is me really, truly, one, honoring that act, but two, recognizing their talent. And I think honoring the act, that act of sort of selflessness, especially in the arts, and it's all types of people that have helped me get to where I am. And I didn't want to be the person that got to where I am to this point and not bring them along. And I thought about this as a unit. If you have this kind of group of people working to help one person together as, I don't want to call them a collective, but collectively, how would they benefit, the audiences that they come in contact with, or the other artists that we might bring in who are, sort of outside of that? Like, what happens when we have this, like, really strong gravitational pull of people who are good at helping? And I think that was one of the most important factors for me along the way of creating this new roster. I wanted to be sure that I honored each and every one of them,
Right.
but also make sure that, it's got to be about talent, but
Right.
it's an amazing feeling to give that back.
And one of those artists is Ali.
Ali Leroy.
Right? And I had chosen, so your work and his work, we're working on kind of doing something that's non-virtual, so in real life, public art piece. And I had chosen his work based on sheer impact, like what I felt from it. They were beautiful. There's two beautiful pieces in there. We'll actually get them up on screen, Harborfront. If you could quickly show up one of Ali Leroy's pieces. But can you tell us kind of like the relationship, because he's an important one for you. And I had no idea who he was. I didn't know he was like this great co-producer of the Chris Tucker show.
Well, the Chris Rock joint, Chris Rock. Yeah.
Chris Rock, not Chris Tucker, Chris Rock.
Right. So Ali Leroy is a co-creator of Everyone Hates Chris.
Yes.
A director. He's worked on Survivor's. He's worked on Survivor's Remorse. He's worked on tons of stuff. That's television and film. And he is one of these guys who I met him through Instagram. That's first and foremost.
Some of the best.
Right. Yeah. He took a liking to some of my work, and this was maybe about 5 years ago, I think, that we started talking, and it just kind of slowly built. And he liked some work, and then he was like, "Hey, I want to buy some." I ain't gonna say no. But here's the thing: I didn't, do the due diligence of, researching him at all when we first met. It was just kind of like, okay, this guy, Mr. Leroy, that's his handle. So I was just like, all right, this guy likes work. He's a brother. He seems cool. And we keep talking about, photography and things like that. And eventually, it builds to a point where I just was like, I want to meet this cat. So I actually looked him up, and then I realized who he was. I was like, oh, okay. I was like, this dude's in Hollywood. That's pretty cool. And he's doing all these things, and he's done all these things. He's kind of like, this legendary figure in a way. So I was like, I hit him up. I was like, hey man, this is when I was up for a grant from Ava DuVernay's and Getty. It was I can't remember the name of the grant, but I was coming to LA to receive the award, and I was like, yo, I'll be out there. Let's link up. So went out there, on an off day before I had to be present for everything happening with Getty and Ava's space, and we just hung out, and it was like the coolest thing ever. We kicked it. We talk shop now. That man knows some cameras and some lenses. Like he taught me more than I ever could have imagined. And in knowing him, he upped my game. Like there were some cameras of his that he wasn't using, and he hooked me up with a couple. I got a pretty good brother discount. And it made my work better, it made my career better. But then there was the advice provided along the way when I started getting commercial jobs Knowing that he knew, what it would be like on the network side when I started to get these calls, specifically with Showtime, because he had a relationship with Showtime, CBS and Showtime at the time. So I called and I just asked him, what's a good negotiation point? How do I make it, make it work for me? He gave me all the insider information, and it turned out to be a very good job because it ended up being the work I did for The Shy, season 3 in the key art. But the work that Ali has going up in the physical space up at Harborfront is from a trip that he took last year to Kenya. And he just did it on a whim. I think he just like up and left one day and just, started shooting. And the one thing I love about Ali's work is that he can get, he's a big dude. He's a really tall guy, but he gets into these small, intimate spaces and crowds and gets close to people in a way that you wouldn't expect someone of his stature to be able to do. So he ends up getting these really kind of interesting action, intimate shots. And if you have the other one, I'd love for everyone to see.
Oh yeah, the other Ali piece.
Yeah, because this one is like,
yeah, we can pull that up.
You can't beat it. I think it's called Temple.
Ali Leroy Temple. Yeah, we have it. Actually, I really want to touch on that one because that is one of the ones too that is going to be next to your work, and I'm dying to personally know this piece a bit more.
I mean, all I can tell you from what he told me is that this is him doing what he does best, which is moving through tight, intimate spaces and getting these beautifully cinematic type of shots. Like this looks like a movie still to me, And there's so much to be said with with so much going on around this woman in this moment. And it feels like this particular piece, for me, it feels like the surroundings are carved out of her essence. Like, there's this sort of aura around her that's pushing back everything that's around her. You almost don't even see the second figure in the picture. And it's just amazing to me how he was able to.
Never noticed the second figure.
There you go. Right. I mean, but this is what he brings, to the lens, and this is what he's really good at, and this is the kind of work that inspires me.
Yeah.
Not just as a friend of his, is it inspiring, but as a peer, I'm challenged by this work to make better work. Because this is something that when I saw it, I just was like, oh, I was just like, all right, I just like, I give up, So it was one of those moments where, I had to give him all due respect in this shot. Like, you couldn't set something up like this.
No.
Easily. I'll say you couldn't do it easily. No. But here he captures it effortlessly.
It's just, there's so much happening. There's a lot of dialogue that's happening, and it draws you in, and you were really compelled to know what's happening. And like you said, I didn't notice the second figure. I was really brought in by kind of the background and what the story was with this woman. She's beautiful, and she's got the hijab, and she's clearly like, it's a cultural based piece, but like, what's the dialogue that's happening on the outside of it? So I can't wait to show this and see more of it through the group exhibition.
Let me tell you, the most interesting aspect of this entire piece for me is that she has her phone out, and we know that she's engaged with her phone, but because of our sort of history of iconography and the meaning of this type of pose, we tend to throw so much spiritual, investment into it automatically.
Right.
But it's a mundane moment. She's a woman walking through a shoe market checking her phone. And that's this wonderful duality of this piece, is that it challenges all those historical, moments of pieces that feel like this. There's Renaissance pieces or Baroque pieces. And it seems like it's heavier or more weighted than it actually is. And that we bring that, we bring that weight into this photo. But just imagine this, she's just moving along and there's a text and she just happens to have that phone right where it needs to be so it can translate as if it were a painting with much more, spiritual and cultural significance.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I really am looking forward to having this mounted at Harborfront and to seeing it as part of the group exhibition.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of time left, but there's something that was kind of moving. Like we talk about the commercial work, we talk about his like the influence and kind of like there's a little bit of mentorship. It seems like there for you too as you moved into your mentorship from Ali and the shy. You mentioned it earlier. I'm gonna get Harborfront to throw that image up. Yeah, this.
Yeah.
So I see a little bit of that in this. Where there's like a little bit, there's more to the story than what's happening with just the photography that you're doing. And I mean, this could be total Showtime thing where it's like, this was art directed. I have no idea, but I'm seeing some of that come out in the work. And I would love to hear a little bit more about your process with this.
Yeah, this is a great, this is probably from last year, this is probably my favorite job.
It's stunning, by the way. Like it's absolutely stunning, striking.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And it's there's so much work in and around what we did on all this stuff was shot in one day. So there's different variations of this particular totem head. But for me, it was utilizing collage back into where the characters kind of are and where my visual language is. So thankfully, Showtime gave me a lot of leeway. They were like, we love what you do what you do. And this was, unique and rare. And I was thrilled to death that they didn't give me too much, like too many borders. And what they did give me with the borders, I pushed as far as I could. So what you see here, all these flowers are real too. I have to say, like, shout out to
flowers are real. These flowers are real?
All of those flowers are real. Shout out to the entire crew who worked on this.
Wow.
We had so many flowers on set. I wish I had like the video to show you of how many flowers were on set and how it was all brought together. But yeah, the relationship that started, early on with, just kind of dialogue around what this season's about. And I can't get into too much, but the flowers were really an important aspect of it. And for me, again, being tied into myth, I look back on the previous key art from season 1 and season 2. And there was this really high sort of like, wash of color in light. If you look back, there's a wash of reds and yellows and blues. And for this, I felt as though there needed to be, for this season, for the tone of the script, I felt that there still should be this sense of light, but this colorful light, but we needed to bring it down so that the language of what's happening in the script is translated by just seeing this key art. So they gave me a lot of room, like I said, and the portrait, this is the first portrait session, and then the heads were kind of brought together. And a lot of what I did, on set was just kind of educating them about my process and what I like to do. And it was just a great thing for me to have to do this. And if you go to my Instagram account, you'll see the PR shots that are, shot in front of these fabrics that we, I worked with one of the fabricators and set designers, and we created the patterns and sent them out. And they, like, everything was built in and around stuff that I'd already shot. Mm-hmm. Like there was street photography based stuff that was exciting. Like if you go to the Shy's Instagram account, you'll see there's stuff that looks very street. It's not, it's all stuff that was made on set based on other photos that I've done. They wanted that feeling that was already sort of embedded in my work. And we shot it all in Chicago. And it was, really great. And I do have a Yolanda Ross, who is on the show, she's been a friend of mine for a long time. This was like one of the best things ever, is that I actually had a relationship with somebody, a friendship with somebody from the show. So it made it a lot easier to communicate what I wanted, and she could communicate back to me what would work, what wouldn't, based on, her experiences. So I'll be honest with you. I hope to God Showtime calls me again for something else, because working with them was everything a creator in general, Black or otherwise.
Yeah.
It was everything you can ask for, and I was just thrilled to do it. And I mean, this came on the heels of doing Buju Banton and all of his PR and key art that you've been seeing online. Like that was, I was coming off of that, and then right before that, I was doing Colin Kaepernick's Know Your Rights camp stuff. So it was these 3 really great jobs in a row. Yeah. But the experiences sort of rolled into this one, and then it just was such a rewarding experience.
Thank you, Shawn. That was beautiful. I mean, shout out to Showtime too.
Yeah, shout them out.
Awesome. That is an awesome series, and the art is stunning. And I know we're out of time, and if there's any questions from the viewers, please pop them up now. But we landed on such a nice note with all like the artwork. But I am so curious right now, especially because you're shouting out Showtime, and obviously this was shot before there was a need to go after like Black artistry and Black artists and Black voices. How is that looking for you right now in terms of just being sought out from galleries? And I think I said I was going to allude to this later, but I think it's a good message, just in terms of what your decision making is for these galleries and these institutions and these places that might have shut the door earlier towards you. It's like, we've just gone through your body of work, and it's undeniable, right? So it's like, there's really any good curator, any relevant institution, it's undeniable. But I would love to know kind of what is your process with picking and choosing now who you work with. You're working with us with Harborfront. You've come on to voice yourself here. I think it's important to know what your train of thought is when you're deciphering what is worth your time, because now everybody wants a piece of your time.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I think every Black creative right now, given our current state of affairs, is their phone is ringing or their email is going, and it's more than usual, because these institutions are trying to avoid cancel culture and trying their best to, just adjust or course correct, if you will. For me, it's been interesting. I've been offered a lot of different things, that some things make sense and some things don't. I remember I was given a potential assignment to describe in a piece for publication, describe white privilege. I'm like, how am I going to do that? Like, it was challenging, but I feel like it's not my place to do so.
There's a lot of books for that.
Right, but it's like, visually, how am I going to interpret that? And I don't think it's a question you want to ask a Black artist to have to do, because it's not the education that I particularly want to provide to any audience, particularly a white audience. I think it's the work that needs to be done inside of white audiences and white homes and white spaces that consider themselves in the sort of or under the umbrella of allyship. This is your job. People ask me about Black Lives Matter, and as a phrase, of course Black Lives Matter, but it's not something that I'm wearing around my around my person every day. I wake up and I'm alive. Guess what? That matters to me. I don't have to preach it to any audience. I think it needs to be said by people who frankly don't look like me.
Right.
It's not my job to tell you about a 100-year-old phrase. Like, it's not new. Black lives Matter is not a new thing. In America, in and around, from Reconstruction through Jim Crow, through the Civil Rights era, up to now, this is an old phrase, that our lives matter. So I can't add anything to that. If you ask me other questions about Black power, Black liberation, those are the spaces and places I like to talk. But with regard to my phone ringing with the type of work that comes out of the blue or all of a sudden, I've been very judicious about who I'm aligning myself with, and if there are people on the other side of that call or that email that look like me, that I can do work with, because I'm not going to do work with an organization institution, or people who just arrived to the shores of my life having meaning. It's as simple as that. If this is new to you, continue doing the research, continue doing the education, and give me rest from the fatigue of having to deal with your newfound sense of understanding of Black life.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That was my last question. I think that was a perfect closure for this conversation. And I just want to shout out everybody, just like all of this work is kind of captured. And I believe the group show that is curated by Shawn Theodore, that's also with Harborfront, that will be going up and virtual and with some pieces outside, is called Reasonable Nomenclatures of Invisibility. Did I say it right?
Nomenclatures, yes.
Nomenclatures of Invisibility. So this is a show that you've curated on with Paris, Texas, LA, and it's a traveling group show. Is that right?
That's it. Yeah.
Is its first stop Toronto?
You better believe it. I told you I was hooking you up.
You know how to do it up here in Toronto.
Look, this is the transaction right here.
So keep an eye out for that, and also for Future Antebellum by Shawn Theodore, which I'm curating on behalf of Harborfront, also part of the digital and in-person series that we're doing. Shawn, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This was so insightful and educational, and I learned so much as someone who follows your work, and we've spoken so many times. There was so much here to absorb.
We got to keep doing this. That's the real deal. We got to keep doing it.
This is the whole point too of this. The Mic is On series is, kind of amplifying these important voices at a time when everything is recorded. So I'm really happy that we have this recorded, that we've had this dialogue, and you've been able to share with your Canadian and your American audience tonight. So thank you so much.
And let me just say thank you for everything you've done for me. A lot of people, don't know. Ashley is a boss, and y'all better get to know her. She's making moves, and I'm in full support of everything this woman does right here. She has done wonders for me, and I appreciate everything you've done thus far. And I honestly, I tell you this every day, I can't wait for the next thing and the next thing.
The next chapter. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Indeed.
All right. To the rest of our audiences, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check out Trey's live performances, including her own on Saturday at 7:30.